Welcome back for our fourth and final episode of Growing Swiss Chard from Seeds. It's day 59. It's only been a day since the end of the third episode, yet my plants are already wilting again. I've been having a real problem keeping these things hydrated, and as I've said many times before, I think that's mostly due to the use of potting mix. By volume, the bottom 95% of the soil mass in here is potting mix. It was long ago sterilized. But as I've noted in this and many other series lately, in 2017, 2018, I think that's a poor way to get plants started. And it seems like all my plants get off to a very slow start. And I'm certain they would do better in at least a higher percentage mix of wild clay dirt or just entirely clay dirt. So I'm fast forwarding this. You can hear the birds chirping 500% faster. Well, actually it's 400% faster, and you can see the leaves regaining turgor pressure right before our very eyes. So it's quite amazing how fast they can react. But clearly everything down there was parched, and until I just watered, within maybe a minute or two we start to see a response. It's very subtle. You can see it in the smaller plants that are closer to us, and the larger plants have a more advanced and comprehensive root network down there. So they have more resources, more volume of soil and potting mix to draw upon. So the new balcony is a beautiful sight. It's much better for filming than my old one, and the video production quality has gone up quite a bit in my opinion, and there's not so much activity in the background. All the queen palms and the giant birds of paradise attract a lot of birds, house finches, and mourning doves. So it's day 61 and everything's still looking a little bit limp, which is surprising given how much I watered last time. So I'm just going to water yet again. And the one with the white stalks, or not much coloration at all, sort of looks like a different species or a weed if you don't pay close attention. And the leaf morphology clearly becomes more curly and veiny as these things get older. But I'm close to being ready to harvest. I think the packet suggestion of 60 days till harvest holds true if you have optimal conditions. Obviously, growing these things on a balcony, especially in the old location where it got only a few hours of afternoon sunlight a day, were far from optimal. And if I had full sun, I would definitely have much bigger leaves, and if I had better nutrition. So it's day 63, and I'm going to give you a final view of everything before I make my harvest. So I don't really care about those little leaves at the bottom that have been sagging all series and are largely unproductive. I'm going to eat all of this foliage, the stuff that doesn't have blemishes, which is almost all of it. I don't really see any problems. I think maybe a leaf or two have white spots, and as I'll show you later, some of the cotyledons and smaller leaves that were first to emerge are just lying on the soil rotten, or just the nutrients were absorbed long ago and they just yellowed out and died. So this is looking pretty appetizing. I've never eaten Swiss chard before actually, and this will be my first. So I expect it to be like many other leafy greens. It's something you would expect to see in a salad bag. At least I don't know that I've eaten it. Maybe I did. So you can see more leaves coming out of the center, and as I said, some of these leaves just permanently lose their turgor pressure, like that one, and will turn over. And the cotyledons are all pretty much dead now. So I think I was right to sacrifice everything, or maybe it wasn't up to me, but I added was it a second or a third helping of wild clay dirt on the bases, and that buried a lot of those petioles of the cotyledons and initial leaves. So I'm doing a little bit more watering, not for the leaves that I'm going to harvest today, not for their sake, although it will help add a little bit of perk to them, turgor pressure, so they'll be juicier. But I'm going to keep the smaller and medium-sized leaves in this pot alive for maybe 2 more days or more than that, and then just harvest those as well. So most of this video will actually be devoted to cooking this stuff. And at first I'm going to show you my recipe for a pork shoulder blade roast. This is boneless because the shoulder blades with the bones are very hard to cut around, and the meat that's attached to the shoulder blade itself is pretty tough muscle. So I like the boneless versions. I don't know why some of these have a netting around them, and at first that discouraged me from buying them, but this is my first time buying one of these packets. Other than an aesthetic marring or a leaving of a pattern on the meat, which is pretty inconsequential. I don't see what the problem is. So I like buying thick cuts of meat like this. Doesn't matter whether it's pork or beef or chicken, because that helps retain the juices in there. So if you cook it for a long time, the stuff in the center is absolutely amazing. The juices preserve very well, and it's the opposite of increasing the surface area to volume ratio. Here the surface area to volume ratio is low, so when you cook it won't dry out as fast, and it also doesn't rot as fast. So big steaks like this stay fresh for a very long time in your refrigerator if you have it cold enough, whereas if you buy pre-cut steaks, my observation is that those tend to smell bad and rot a lot quicker. So as long as you don't buy a pack of meat that already smells bad the moment you've taken it home from the supermarket and ripped it open to start preparing some, then you're good to go. You can keep it for a while, but if you smell even the slightest whiff of a bad odor, that means you got to eat it fast. So I put the rest in a new Ziploc bag that I'm going to put in my refrigerator. I have it on the second coldest setting, and I put this chunk that I'm going to eat in a non-stick pan. It's a small, well, maybe it's not a small saucepan, but it's maybe a medium small non-stick saucepan. They sell these in Target. I think they're maybe the low 20s of dollars. And this is the seasoning I like to use. It's McCormick. It's a brown sugar bourbon. They sell this in Vaughn's, and I'm sure it's available nationwide. So I'm going to turn this heat up to medium. It's 5:48 p.m. and I'm going to sprinkle on some of my favorite seasoning on all sides. I made the mistake early on when I started developing this recipe of only doing it on the top. Then the meat isn't as flavorful elsewhere. So of course you're going to get some residual seasoning, quite a lot actually, on the bottom and the edges. So I just use areas that I think are under seasoned, and I wipe basically, and I put the fattiest side facing down because that's the side that's going to leak out a lot of oil and not burn. So if there isn't one, then just use your best judgment. So start by cooking on medium heat for maybe 10 to 20 minutes. Go to your computer or do whatever else you were going to do, and after a while check on it. So that thing is still pretty raw, but you can see the yellow oil from the pork shoulder accumulating at the bottom. So I would just keep it at medium at this point until further notice. So it's 5:58 p.m. now it's 6:06. So it's been almost 20 minutes. And as you can see, the color has changed because it's air cooking on the top, although it still is pretty raw on the top. But you can see a pool of oil now. Go ahead and change that to medium low. And this applied to my old stove in the old apartment that had heat coils. I love this new appliance from Whirlpool where I could just clean it very easily and not have these dirty rusty coils and coil pans. So after it's done, another, 30 minutes elapsed. It's pretty much done. You can actually keep it on the spot it once was, but I moved it over here to cool it down a little bit faster. So yeah, that's 50 minutes total from start to the end. And then you let it cool for maybe 20 minutes, and when you cut into it, you should see clear juices running out. Pork has to be cooked very thoroughly to kill any parasites or eggs that might be in there. So this is very well done, but at the same time it's also very fatty, oily, and very juicy. So it's much easier to cook than beef, in my opinion, and doesn't dry out like things like chicken breast or top loin or whatever. So this is a pretty good cut. Typically it sells for around $3 a pound. So it's 2018 for reference if you're watching this ages later, and it's really expensive by then. So I'm going to just enjoy this and cut away all those little chunks of fat. One trick you can do if you don't want to eat so much oil is just have a paper towel on your plate and dab the really greasy chunks onto it, and you'll be surprised at how much oil is absorbed. You can see the discoloration in a napkin or a paper towel. So I know there are schools of dietary thought where people say, yeah, just eat all the fat and oil you want, but for me, I think it gives me pimples. Well, at least that's been my observation time and again if I indulge in excess fat and oil. So this is going somewhere, of course. I'm going to get back to the Swiss chard. I cooked this because I wanted to use the leftover oil to cook my Swiss chard with. So this is the main course, and the Swiss chard will be the vegetable that complements it. So this is delicious. It's something that I do on a frequent basis, and it provides a lot of nutrition, a lot of protein. It also gives quite a bit of fat, which you need, of course, but definitely much better than just eating carbohydrates and junk food all day. So this is my first harvest. I know it doesn't look nearly as much as it did outside, and it's doesn't seem like a very impressive helping. I wish I had more leaves to harvest, but that's just the way the dice rolled. The potting mix just got these off to a very slow start. In the first episode, by day 31 at the end, there was barely anything growing out of the potting mix. It was sort of weed-like in resemblance. And in the months since, we've had a lot of growth, but it's still not huge. I've seen videos of people who have leaves that are as big as their torso. It depends on how long you let it grow for, and the nutrition, the amount of sunlight it gets, and so on. So I've seen professional chefs dice these up into tiny little squares. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to do maybe 4 or so simple cuts. And I'm going to use this leftover pork oil to stir fry the Swiss chard. I'm going to turn it on to medium-high heat. High would be fine too, but in terms of time difference, it doesn't really make any difference in my opinion. So I'm just going to dump in these leaves. It's not a whole lot, and the rest of the leaves out there will hopefully grow for the next 2 days, and then I could have a slightly bigger harvest by then. So I've never cooked this before. I've cooked a lot of helpings of bean sprouts from the supermarket this way, and typically I would drain the oil after all the volume's lost. As you can see right now, the volume of the leaves is it's deflating right before our very eyes, and that's probably because of the heat. So all the water inside is evaporating and coming outwards. So pretty soon it all goes flat, and that's a familiar sight. Whether you're doing this with spinach or whatever, all the leaves lose their volume. So as soon as that happens, add some seasoning. I'm adding a dash of this brown sugar bourbon again from McCormick, and a dash of salt, and that's the one that actually will spray outside due to the shaker design if you're not careful. So I kind of dip it in there, and I added some black pepper. I've had that for a while, and you don't need to add much. Typically I would actually drain the oil out, pour it out, and hold the leaves back, the bean sprouts back with this ladle, and I do that in the kitchen sink and then just kind of wash it away while I have the water running. So that's way too much oil, but that's okay because I'm going to sort of strain everything out. It doesn't matter. Even if I pour everything into a bowl, I'm not going to drink any of that oil anyway. But the leaves will be fairly oily, and don't overcook them. They're fully cooked and sterilized long ago. So you don't have to worry about microbes pretty much. As soon as things are sizzling in there, and the leaves have lost all their volume and they're in boiling oil, it's all good. You're not going to catch any foodborne illnesses. And these are some of the cleanest leaves out there because they're just growing on my balcony. No animals have stopped by to peruse them. So you don't really need to wait for these to cool down like you do with the meat. There's an insanely high surface area to volume ratio, and this is a very, very small volume. I wish I had a lot more leaf mass, initial volume to do a demo with, because this is hardly anything. But like I said, with all other leafy greens, if you stir fry them, the volume just goes away. So you could start with a really big bag that could even cost several dollars, and it'll just all fry away to nothing. And you can see all the oil in there. So I'll just pour cold water into that and pour it down the kitchen sink. Let it run for a while, and that's basically it. So if I had a supermarket serving of vegetables, I would have a better demo to go with, but principles are all the same. So eat after a few minutes. If you wait too long and you stir fry them in animal oil and they become room temperature, everything will congeal. So this is really good. Tastes like many other leafy greens. I've seen videos of other people who are eating their own produce, and they sometimes go overboard on proclaiming how much better this tastes than store-bought goods. In this case, I couldn't really taste a huge difference. Maybe it would be different for my raspberries if that series comes to fruition. So yeah, I don't need all that oil, but it's very, very tasty, and it was something that was just a byproduct of cooking the pork steak, pork shoulder. So it's a pretty good way to use it. You could also stir fry eggs, scramble some eggs, or do other things, or use it as part of a dipping sauce. But if everything's fresh, it tastes really good. I'm not sure how good this would be the next day. I've never tried that. So that's pretty much it. 60 days of growing, and maybe 2/3 of it is gone right there in less than a minute. I'm sure there are many, many other ways out there to prepare a Swiss chard, and there are videos out there on YouTube as well. So it's day 65. It's my second and final harvest. I'm going to use these later. I do all my gardening work in the morning and filming, and I'm going to eat these leaves perhaps in the mid-afternoon or whenever I have time. So I'm not going to cut away those really saggy leaves that look like mush and are covered in dirt, and anything that just looks undesirable in general. Either way, I'm not going to have a huge amount of leaves. I mean, it looks like a decent amount in this bag, sort of like a salad bag. It looks very fresh. I've never had bug problems in this series, but I know when I cook that, it's going to be a tiny amount, just like 2 days ago. So let's examine the root systems. So to my shock, the roots are also the same color as the petioles and the stem. They're a little bit different, maybe more of a pink. Well, this one is just pink all the way, maybe. So this is slightly different. Maybe it would have turned red if it got older, I don't know, but I thought the two plants would be joined at the hip, like conjoined twins, and it turns out they're not. I think for that first set that I pulled out, the little lateral roots are tangled together in the potting mix. So this bigger plant has the best individual root system maybe, and it takes a while to knock all this wet potting mix off. So as you can see, it's mostly potting mix. It wasn't really growing in clay loam or clay dirt from the wild. that I bought in and layered on the top as a Band-Aid solution to try to fix all this. So yeah, that's basically it, and I hope you really enjoyed watching this plant growing series of Swiss chard. And I'm going to use this pot after I process it a little bit and get in a lot more clay and mix it really well in there to grow some other vegetable. So hopefully I'll have a new vegetable growing series in 2 weeks. Thanks for watching.